Hello there everybody, my name is Adam Cleary and welcome back to another exciting episode of Star Trek Picard Ups and Downs, the show where, you know the drill by now, I go through an episode of Picard, I give the good bits an up, I give the bad bits a down, and I would like to officially declare us in the home straight. Because this is episode 7, and after this we have only 3 more episodes to get us to our exciting conclusion. Will the Federation actually be the good guys? Will the Romulans actually be the bad guys? Will we ever actually work out what on earth is going on with the Borg? If we're going to get answers to any of those questions, we are getting them in the next 2 hours, 40 minutes of airtime. Or rather, we will after this episode, because this is episode 7, Nepenthe, in which we have escaped the Borg cube, the artifact, and gone to an unknown planet for as yet unknown reasons. Picard and Soulg, they are on the run, but they're taking a little pit stop to try and get their act together. But will it be good? Will it be bad? Well, let us digress. I am very proud to announce that we have partnered with Star Trek Fleet Command to help bring you this video. And if you're sitting there going, hang on Adam, I'm a Star Trek fan, would that be right up my street by any chance? Then yes, it would. So what we have here is an open world strategic MMO set deep within the Star Trek universe that is available on iOS and Android and is completely free to play. Which is just as well, because as far as I'm aware, the App Store doesn't take Latinum. Eh? It pulls from all corners of the Trekverse and you can recruit a host of familiar faces, from Spock to Kirk and this cuddly character called Vel. And how are you going to say no to that face? Level up your crew by sending them out to the edges of space while you kick back and enjoy these stunning graphics. There are weekly missions and events, a thriving community that operates both inside the game and out, and you can build and upgrade your own iconic starships. These are some of mine, and if you come at me, I will mess you up. Click the link in the description to find out more and start your own adventure, and yes, back to our video. And actually, sorry, just before we begin, tea, builders, hot. It's a weird mug. Right, we open with a recap this week because we always open with a recap, but it's our shortest jump back in time yet. Not all the way to somebody's childhood, not to somebody's career before they started in this show. It is to Agnes just sitting there eating a lunch when she is approached by Commodore O. Now, the show deliberately left this quite vague. We didn't know what was said or what happened. Agnes just randomly showed up and decided to tag along with our intrepid crew. But we find out that what actually happened was that Commodore O decided to tell Agnes that her entire life spent researching synthetics and being obsessed with androids was in actual fact quite bad, because something terrible is going to happen. And the thing is, right, while this is pretty much exactly what we expected, we all knew Agnes was going to be working for the other team, I'm going to give it an up because it adds a really interesting wrinkle to the story. Like, think about what they've actually done here. They haven't coerced her or blackmailed her or manipulated her or brainwashed her or anything like that. They've just sat down and they've shown her what is going to happen. And this is a woman who is obsessed with synthetic life, who has given her entire life towards this, who was in love with Bruce Maddox, and just by presenting her with what we assume are the facts of the situation, she is switched like that. And it makes you wonder, are our good guys actually on the right side? Because if you can turn Agnes like that, surely you've got a case. And from there, we jump right back to the artifact, in which Narissa is starting to execute the XBs to try and get the information out of Hugh for where Picard has gone. And do you know what? It is about time we give this character, and indeed the actor playing it, their due, because Peyton List is fast emerging as one of the most watchable things on this show. Yes, okay, we have kind of been distracted with the whole will they, won't they, oh god, please, I hope they don't, their brother and sister romance she's been having with her brother. But now that she's on her own, she's becoming the most present, the most threatening danger on the show. And the thing is, she's obviously just a smaller player in this grander narrative of the Romulan Federation conspiracy and the links to the synthetic life and the Borg, but in the here and now, she is the big antagonist, and she's genuinely really thriving in this role. So she, on her own, purely for the short screen time she has in this episode, gets her own up. And from there, we go into the episode proper, and I'm just gonna have to broach a really broad, wide subject here, and it's kind of complicated, so just sit down, we'll get through it, right? At its heart, Nepenthe is a Pitstop episode. It basically takes a big diversion from the main storyline. Not a lot really happens in relation to that, and instead we get a bit of character development, some more about the relationship between Picard and Soulg. And the thing is, we couldn't really afford this diversion. The fact that it is a pit stop episode is a down. Don't get me twisted, I genuinely really like this episode, and in isolation I think it works brilliantly, but in the context of the whole series, we had spent enough time setting the scene, developing the characters. We now had to race through to the exciting conclusion of all of this, and I just think this feels very much tacked in to the thing. Like, I get why they've done it, but just, we wanted that story to continue. If they were going to do this, they should have done it earlier. If they really wanted to have Riker and Troy in it, then they should have been back on Earth where Picard was working out whether or not he should have gone on this mission in the first place. If they really need a reason for Soulg to trust Picard, it should be because his actions necessitate her trusting him, not just because two people with a nice house told her to. And it just meant this week had this whole vibe of like seeing a really old friend in the street when you're already late for a really important appointment. Like, oh, Will, oh my God, Will, oh, it's so good to see you, but I've got to save the galaxy. Now, if you've watched this show for a while, you will have heard me use the words, this is a small gripe, etc, but I give it a down anyway. And this is a very small positive, but I'm gonna give it an up anyway, because I really like Eleanor's commitment to his gimmick. Here is a man, a Coat Milat nun warrior ninja thing, who doesn't really like Picard because he abandoned him, but he is still binding himself to his cause because he will bind himself to lost causes. He thinks the whole mission he's on is completely hopeless, so he decides to go with him anyway. And then, when they're trying to escape the artifact, he beams over because he thinks that escape attempt is ultimately doomed and he should try and help. And then when they do escape, he decides to stay behind to protect Hugh because pretty much Hugh is completely boned and he thinks that's the kind of thing he should be giving his time to. And then, when Hugh unfortunately dies, he decides to stay behind on the cube to get revenge on the Romulans and activate whatever the big secret is with the artifact. If you are gonna have a gimmick of lost causes, that is so absurdly consistent. I really enjoy it. Up. I mean, like, let's face it, at this point, Eleanor has nothing to do with the main storyline. At this point, he is just this bizarre subplot onto himself. Every single week, one man finds a hopeless lost cause and tries to die in defense of it. You've got to respect that, if nothing else. And speaking of the death of Hugh, I get it. I get that the guy had an arc. I get that he sort of wrapped up his whole story from the next generation, and I get that him giving back to the Borg and giving back to Picard and all this wraps up that nice little narrative thing he had from that one episode. But the thing is, he was a brilliant character on this show. He had a strength and a conviction and a clarity of purpose that so few other people have. He was brilliant in it, and if they are going to bring everything back around at the end of the series, him and Seven of Nine should have been fighting side by side. I think there was way more of this guy's story to tell, and until I get a really good reason why it had to be written out in the last few episodes, I thought this was a genuine misstep. Story-wise, I think his death is a down. And it wasn't even that heroic. He just sort of stood there and got a in the neck. Like, go out in a blaze of glory, jump in front of a phaser, just something. Or better yet, how's this one? He steals the Borg cube and he crashes it in to a load of Romulan ships or something. Just anything other than just getting a little nick in your neck, falling over, being like, yeah, well, that was fun. And so anyway, now back to the planet where 90% of the episode happens, and Picard and Sogen meet Will Riker, Deanna Troy, and their daughter Castra, who was nearly an up all of her own because she's so well written for the purposes of the storyline. She's that exact perfect mix of like childhood curiosity, but also quarter betazoid like intuition. Like, she's a kid, of course she is, so she wants to know everything about Sogen. She thinks she's really cool and wants to talk about data and wants to talk about all this stuff, which is genuinely quite painful for her, but at the same time, she gets that. She empathizes. She is able to navigate around it much better than Picard is. And it is that relationship in this episode between Picard and Sogen that deserves an up, because, I mean, if you've ever seen Mean Girls, like 80% of the themes of Star Trek Picard are just, oh my God, JeanLuc, you can't just ask somebody why they're an android. Like, genuinely, pretty much every single episode of this show has somebody sitting Picard down and going, do you know what, mate? You're actually a piece of Starfleet CNC virtually yeets him out of the building when he asks for a ship that time. Laris really hits him with some home truths when he's on about going back into the galaxy on another big adventure. That former Romulan senator reminds him of all the promises he broke before he gets his head cut off. The Coat Milat, they really do deep fry their absolute candor for him. And then Raffy is quite happy to point out that he ruined both her career and her life. It is, in parts, brutal. And he does it again in this episode. He just drops into Sogen that, oh yeah, by the way, your entire life has been a lie. Oh no, sorry, not your entire life, your sister. She was real, and I say was because she's now dead. Sorry. So absolutely fair play that it took 2 parents to then pull him up on this and be like, well, you can't talk to people like this. You can't treat them like they're Starfleet officers. This is a young girl who is either like a teenager or literally 3 years old, who is confused about everything, whose world has collapsed around her. And you can't just be like, right, pip, pip, up you get, soldier, we're going to go off to the home world and save everything. You need to handle this like a human being, even if she is not one. It's a great consistent theme that's run through this show, that JeanLuc Picard, the all-knowing, almighty humanitarian JeanLuc Picard, is in actual fact a piece of up. Anyway, yes, on to Riker and Troy, and I absolutely hate giving ups purely for fan service. That's not a complaint specific to Picard, by the way. I've done like Game of Thrones, I do all the wrestling ones, I've done other stuff. It always feels really cheap, like they've looked at some glaring hole in the show and gone, oh, geez, what it is? Chuck somebody from the 80s in there, that'll shut them up. 9 times out of 10, they are there purely to mask the shortcomings of the show, and while that is almost certainly true of Riker and Troy in this episode, you show me a single Star Trek fan who cares, and I will show you a liar. This whole thing is just this wonderful, emotive, warm love letter to the next generation. Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis play it absolutely perfectly. They are delighted to see Picard. They will do anything for it, but they're dealing with their own tragedy in the midst of it. It's just so well weighted and so well performed. It is just this big, warm Star Trek hug this episode, and yeah, you know what it is? It probably is purely fan service, but I am a fan, and I do occasionally like to be serviced, so it's enough. And that brings me to the overall feel of this episode. Yes, it shouldn't have been where it is in the show. Yes, we should have continued with the story we're all invested in, but I can't do anything about that. I can only sit there and watch the episode and let it wash over me and tell you how I feel, and this was... Right, hear me out here. This was the least Star Trek Picard episode of Star Trek Picard, but it was the most Star Trek episode of Star Trek Picard. And apparently there's a very good reason for that, because according to a recent interview, Jonathan Frakes sat down with the writers and the producers and the directors, and they had it all laid out, and they just decided amongst them that it just missed a little bit of the next generation, so they came up with this episode purely to fill that gap. And yes, as a result, it does feel shoehorned in, but as a result, it is also very the next generation. It is hopeful and family orientated and just everything Picard hasn't been so far. Now, just to be clear here, I really like the tone and the themes and the darkness of Star Trek Picard. I think it's a really interesting look at the Star Trek universe, but I also did really like the next generation and just how warm and friendly and hopeful all that was. So if they can just wedge a little bit of that into this without really ruining the core of this, I am massively in favour of it. The big Star Trek feel of this episode also gets an up. And while I would dearly love to have a warm, hopeful end to this episode of Ups and Downs, I sadly cannot, because we need to talk about Agnes. Now, like I said at the start, I do actually like what they've done by convincing her to turn on everybody rather than just manipulating her, but if she has in fact turned on everybody, why does she keep trying to help them? And if she was going to kill Bruce Maddox, why did she then beam him back up from Free Cloud and kill him on the medical table? She could have just left everybody down there to rot, effectively. And now if she is so desperate to do the right thing, why doesn't she just get herself in an escape pod and leave, rather than putting herself in a coma? Make your mind up. Now, yeah, you can sort of explain this all away with a bit of a wave of the hand and the words, look, give her a break, mate, she's new at all this spy stuff, but that doesn't explain why seasoned intelligent officer Raffy hasn't somehow seen through it, and why I've seen it all, mate, honest Captain Rios somehow suspected his own friend before he suspected her, even though, admittedly, they did sleep together. I don't know, just a down. So there you have it, those are all the ups and downs for this week's episode of Star Trek Picard. It's been like doing this for me, getting better and better and better, and then we just stopped for a little sit, and it was all nice and warm, and I'm just hoping we pick it all back up next week, because there's only 3 episodes left, and it's all, there's Romulans with things to the head, and exploding planets, and all this Borg stuff, and 7 and 9's coming back, and it's all going to happen in the culmination, and I cannot wait for it. But as ever, let me know what you made of the episode in the comments below, then go and like the video, then go and share the video, then go and subscribe to Trek Culture. I don't ask for a lot, I think you can do me this one solid, then, I don't know, if you've got a bit of free time after that, go follow me on Twitter as well. But in the meantime, like I say, thank you so much for watching. I've, of course, been Adam Cleary, and I will see you next week. Bye.